All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our Franchise Your Business webinar and podcast series. And today's session is all about FDD renewals that we're going to be talking about. And by the way, for those of you that are new to us or just joining us for the first time, my name is Tom Dufour. I'm the host for our program. I'm the founder and CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. And while you're here and we're getting things going, we'd love for you to subscribe to our great content. So you can subscribe to this podcast over at the Franchise Your Business podcast on your favorite podcast service, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is just Big Sky Franchise Team, where you can get access to this as well as our other podcast series called Multiply Your Success. That's fast approaching 300 episodes now. And as I was leading into this, today's session is all about FDDs and specifically FDD Renewal, and we are in the thick of the renewal season. And I am so grateful to have with us the partners over at EntrePartner Law Firm. And so I'll introduce Meredith Bauer. And Meredith started EntrePartner Law Firm in 2011 after her realization that entrepreneurial clients needed practical, actionable legal advice at reasonable, foreseeable costs. So she built EntrePartner to meet that need and provides counsel to startup, growing, and experienced entities in the franchise space. Along with us today is Ken Hall, who joined EntrePartner Law in 2018 after a background in big firm law, and his desire to provide pragmatic advice to his varied business clients. Ken's entrepreneurial background also includes business Ken founded in the retail and food production business, including as a franchisor himself. So with that as just a quick intro, Meredith and Ken, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and start digging into some of this FDD renewal stuff.
Thank you. We are excited to be here. It is time. It is the topic of the season, I think, in FDD renewal world. So we're ready to jump in.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, thank you all so very much for being here to talk a little bit about this, especially as I know the IFA conference is fast approaching and travel schedules and so on. So I'm glad we're able to have you all in here. So let's start with just an initial overview and just talk about, for someone, we work with a lot of emerging franchisors or new franchisors, and the renewal period might be new, or maybe this is just a reminder for someone that's maybe been brought into a seasoned franchise company, and maybe they're new to this whole renewal thing. And so I'd love for you guys, let's just give an overview. Why do we need to renew and why now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom, and thanks again for having us. So many, especially new franchisors, they get caught up in the initial FDD that they're preparing and launching a franchise system and everything that goes with that. And as you know, it's a big undertaking. And so when you're focused on that, sometimes what gets forgotten is that the FDD is a living document. It needs to be updated every single year. That's a federal rule. And then in states that require franchises to be registered, the new FDD needs to be registered every year. So the FDD renewal process, it's a little bit different for every system. Some systems kind of keep track of things as they go along. Some systems, kind of wait till the last minute. So I'm glad you, noted we're in the thick of FDD renewal season. I know a lot of people working on them are really far into it. And then I also know there are some that are looking at their calendar and saying, oh my gosh, I haven't done much yet. So I need to get started on that.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask about, so for someone that's going through the renewal or thinking about renewal, someone might say, well, what's the big deal? So what happens if I miss this renewal period? So when is this renewal kind of cut off, and why is it important for them to try to get renewed within this time period?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We talk with our clients a lot about timing. as we kind of end the year and start the new fiscal year for most people. So the renewal is tied to a fiscal year end. Most of our clients have a December 31st fiscal year end. And there's some nuance there depending on what states they're registering in and some of the details, but generally within 90 to 120 days from the end of that fiscal year end, their existing FDD will no longer be valid to make sales from. So that's kind of the driver. We really try to focus on the sales aspect when we're working with our clients. It's not just an administrative hurdle to go through, but instead we really want to facilitate our clients being able to sell and be able to do that without as much disruption as possible. So one of the big timing aspects that we work through with our clients pretty early is identifying a date that we're targeting that's within those windows, and agreeing to that across the organization. So not just, us and the people on the legal team or who's ever guiding the legal process, but actually the sales team as well. And kind of aligning on what that reasonable date will be so that the sales team knows prior to that date, we're going to work to get our deals to come in. We can work off of what, we have existing with their documents and disclosures. And there's that deadline so that after that date, they know they're either going to have to redisclose or in some of the registration states go dark until we get registered. So there's kind of alignment across the board, I think, from a timing perspective in the organization that helps to get everyone on the same page.
Okay, so Meredith, you said the phrase "go dark." Explain what does "go dark" mean for someone that's maybe not on the franchise development or franchise sales world here. What do you mean by that?
So I would distinguish between a registration state and a non-registration state in the franchise world. So there's about 14-ish registration states that when the new FDD is issued, we're going to be sending that into those states and having it go through some type of regulatory approval. So during that pending period in those states, the sales process needs to halt in terms, we can't be continuing sales under the old document. We now have issued a new document. And we're waiting, right, to get that green light to go in those states as quickly as possible. In the non-registration states, go dark, it's a little bit different in that it's not this sort of dark period, but we do have a new document. So we have to start that disclosure over again with any prospects that are out there. So at a minimum, there's that 14-day window that they'll be redisclosed with a new document before they can sign additional agreements after that.
Okay, very, very good. And so one thing in preparing for this, Ken, you had talked a little bit about this, some franchisors are going to get on this early, and they are keeping track of things throughout the year that you all would need to help update their documents, and others wait until kind of the last minute. It's kind of here's the moment. Probably not all that different from tax time. Some folks prepare throughout the year, and others just do it all at once when it's time to do that. So would you mind talking through what are some of the things that are necessary or needed, or that franchisors need to be gathering or compiling or putting together for these FDD renewals?
Sure. Yeah, we focus on there's kind of 6 things that tend to slow down the process. I mean, of course, it's always dependent upon the franchise system and what new things have happened in the previous year. But number one is getting the auditors on board, because with every renewal, you need to submit, with a very few limited exceptions, you need to submit an audit for the previous fiscal year. And that can sometimes take time. And as you can imagine, the auditors, especially those who work with a lot of franchise systems, they get very busy this time of year. So getting on their schedule early, making sure your books are all cleaned up so that they can do the audit, quickly. But we always like to make sure very early on in the process, we're talking about this with our clients, in the fourth quarter, of the previous year about, have you talked to your auditor? Are you on the schedule? Because that often is an anchor around which we have to build the date that we're planning to issue the new FDD. So that's kind of one of the potential bottlenecks. But and as far as kind of tracking things throughout the year, we have a tool that we like to use that's tracking what's happening with locations, if they're being transferred or new locations opening, locations closing, what states are those in? Because uh, item 20 of the FDD, and that's the item that has the tables showing all of the locations, what states they're in, whether they're franchise, corporate. Those can get kind of complicated sometimes, especially when there's a lot of activity happening, and making sure that we're defining, what does it mean to be reacquired versus, if something closed for another reason. We just have to make sure that those all line up, because that is one of the things that regulators, the state regulators, examiners will look at. They want to see, did any locations open in our state and you weren't registered there? We kind of want to dig into that. So that's an important one, and it often can get, hard to recreate what happened in the previous year. So we have, we like to have a tool that as those things are happening, we're tracking it. So then come renewal time, we have, we can look at it and pretty quickly put those together.
Yeah, and
Very.
I think
Yeah, go ahead, Meredith. Yeah.
Ken mentioned there were 6 things that we really focus on, or that tend to be the bigger drivers, I think, in the renewal. I mean, the hot topic that everyone brings up is item 19, typically. So that's the financial performance representation. So some of our clients, if they're new, they might not have one, or they may not have had an item 19 previously. So we like to start working with them pretty early on reviewing what results are eligible for item 19, what that looks like, and if, different ways to format or present that information. With our clients that have had one previously, I think the default is easily for them to come to us and say, just update it with the numbers. Like, this is what we had last year. Let's update to this year. But we like to work through an exercise of really examining whether we're presenting it in the right way, or maybe there's new information that has come out that gives us a new way to present item 19 information. And also working with the sales team to determine, what questions are they getting throughout the process that maybe we can make an FDD disclosure or an item 19 disclosure that they can answer. So a lot of times, maybe they're getting break-even analysis questions that they can't answer because they don't have that in their document. But it's a time to really look at that freshly and determine, if the information is presented accurately, and if there are any, better ways that we can represent their financial results.
Well, that's interesting to bring that up, Meredith, about speaking specifically sometimes directly to the frontline franchise sales team and just asking, what are people saying? I think that's a unique approach to what you're describing, to say, what are the candidates asking about, and what information might we need to change to help provide that information to help them in their decision-making process.
Yeah, and that de-risks, obviously, from the franchisor perspective, the more information that we can put into the document and give those talking points to their sales team, the less risk there is that, there's questions that are coming up along the way that they're struggling to answer.
Very, very interesting. And Ken, one thing I wanted to ask about item 20 that you brought up as well, with describing some of these different categories of a business either sold or closed or reacquired by the franchisor, and some of these terms and technicalities that fall into place. So would you mind sharing maybe an example or two of something that comes up that someone might not necessarily know where maybe clients have a struggle with, or are confused by or uncertain of?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that often comes up, there's a category for franchises that have been terminated. There's another one for, franchises that closed for other reasons. And sometimes questions will come up about, was this actually terminated? They closed and then we terminated it. So there are and can be some nuances there. So, we kind of like to take the approach of just getting the information, from our clients and not putting it on them to try to categorize all these things, or at least, where there are questions, often if we did the work, related to that particular closure or whatever it may be, we're familiar with it and we have the documents and we can look. But yeah, we try to sort of take that load off of them to try, to have to keep track of the different definitions for those types of things.
We also do, I'll add to that. It sounds silly, but there are some questions around openings. So, defining exactly what an opening is something that we do get questions around. If it's not necessarily a retail location, but it's a service-based business, when did it open? Or, does a pre-opening or grand opening, count for the year prior or the year after, which can have some implications on, not only just item 20, but what's included in item 19 and all of it. So that is something that we kind of work with to define a consistent opening definition and what that means and carrying it over into item 20.
Well, that's interesting, Meredith. So what do you think? And now I'm just curious. A grand opening happens, December, 30th or December 15th, and they're in a grand opening for a few weeks, and then they officially launch January 5th or something like that. How do you, in that kind of a scenario, what would that be declared by, or is it brand specific? Are there guidelines or rules orienting around that?
So what we advise our clients is just be consistent. So pick what that is for your brand and apply it consistently then thereafter. So for some clients, they'll really count like the first sale. So that can occur really in that pre-opening process before the party or the grand opening event. Some people will really kind of characterize that as pre-opening, and they have a big party grand opening day, and that is their opening date that they count. So really it's just not changing it based on circumstances, but defining what that is and sticking with it.
Very interesting. Okay, I've interrupted your six items here that you wanted your bullets or talking points. I've interjected. I lost count where we are. I think we're on finish maybe number three. I think we're through. So let's pick back up here with the next.
Sure. We can talk about item 8, and that's the disclosure about suppliers. This is an important one. And our experience is often that when we start this process, we have some initial, like a kickoff call to begin the process, and we'll just ask, when we start out, kind of high overview, did anything change this year? And we very often hear, oh no, same as last year, not much has changed, we're just moving along. We know we need to update some things, but we don't think there's really been any changes. And then we start asking more pointed questions, such as, are you still using this vendor? Or are you still requiring this spec for this equipment? Really kind of have to drill down, because a lot of times the person you're talking to may not be as involved in the day-to-day operations, or that happened, 11, 12 months ago, and they just forget. And item 8 is another one that, examiners look at, prospects look at, because it's kind of where the money's moving. So this is one too that, usually takes a little bit of digging to get at the right, to figure out what the right updates are that need to be made.
Well, and item 8 certainly seems one that for most franchisors, they're pretty familiar with items 5, 6, and 7. The money, right? The money that's either getting paid in or that the franchisees are spending along the way, essentially, and certainly any changes there. And item 19 and item 20 make sense, but item 8 might not be one that's top of the list for them. So that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, and that goes right into our next point. So right on is items 5, 6, and 7. Those are obviously the showstoppers, everyone's looking at those to determine, to line up on the franchise opportunity. That's one, what we really obviously, the franchisor can determine their fee structure and you kind of know if fees are changing. But where we focus in on really pressing is on item 7 itself, which is the outline of the initial cost to, from signing to 3 months after opening. It can be tempting, I think, for franchisors to, if they haven't made big changes in fees or big changes in their program, to just say same as last year. But I think, there's an analysis of really honing in on that to make sure, like, have costs gone up? Has inflation changed? Has anything in there actually changed to be updated so that you're not just kind of presenting um, these ranges without really verifying it. And with that, what we recommend is kind of, with all of this of having this documented, but item 7 in particular, of documenting that you did look at it and having that in one place so that if down the road that's challenged, it's easy to go back and say, this is where we got the information and this is, how we came up with these numbers.
That's a really interesting process, Meredith. I like that you would be that certainly makes sense how you describe that, to document that you at the very least reviewed it and went through some process to reconsider and tracking that. And for someone that may not be as familiar with franchising, why would that even matter, by the way? If the numbers generally stayed the same from one year to the next, or what's the significance of it?
Yeah, and it certainly can happen that the numbers do stay the same. It's not, unheard of. It's just, I think the risk that the franchisor is trying to mitigate against there is down the road, if somebody isn't happy with what they bought into, it can be a really hot button for, potential litigation or for a dispute with franchisees, because at the end of the day, they know what they spent to build it out. And so then they're going to come back and compare it against what you told them it was going to cost. And if it's different, there's a potential issue there. The way to, mitigate that risk is to really show, this is why we disclosed what we did in item 7. We had a reasonable basis to do it. This is the information we used. And that's really what that defense would be down the road if costs are different for a franchisee. And they often can be different. There's the size of their space can be different than the assumptions that were in item 7. They could be in a state with, higher material costs. So it's not just, straight analysis there. So from the franchisor side, just making sure that they can show that why they disclose what they did is the most important piece.
That's really, really helpful to share that. Thank you. And what's is this number 5 we're going into, or number 6? I've again, I lost count here. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I think we're at number 6 if I'm counting
okay,
right.
Perfect.
And that is item 11, which, anyone who's read an FDD knows that a lot of information is crammed into 11, and it covers, quite a few topics, one of them being training. And what we find is that when a system first starts out and they kind of plan how they're going to do their training, they start with that, and then over time it evolves because the system always evolves. And then pretty soon, what's actually being done on the ground in training isn't what's disclosed in the document. So there's a description in every FDD of what types of classroom training and on-the-job training and how many hours are allotted to different topical areas that go along with training. So that's one that often gets overlooked. And again, people read it and they're expecting something when they go to training. And if it doesn't align with what they were expecting, that can cause issues. And then the other thing that really stands out in item 11 as far as often needing updates is the description of computer hardware and software. And as technology has evolved, so often that's software or apps or platforms that franchisees are being required to use. And again, that's one that changes sometimes. Some technology is wrapped up into a package, that the franchisor will charge a technology fee for. Sometimes they'll just require franchisees to, buy directly from a vendor. But again, these are ones, and I think, as time goes on, more and more businesses rely on technology and specialized apps and platforms, and kind of nailing down, what's this going to cost? Is it required or is it just suggested? And making sure that narrative and that content is all up to date is one other thing that I like to make sure we have a handle on.
Well, one question I had that is one that's been coming up a lot more frequently, and it's this idea, since we're talking about technology, it's this idea of the technology fee and what that looks like and what kind of gets included with that, or how you see that work out. And it seems like it's very broad term sometimes, and what's included, what's not included. So I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about the technology fee, how you see some clients using that or franchisors using it, what it's used for, and how franchisors might be adding that into their fee structure as part of it to replace some of these changing technologies and systems.
Yeah, it's a good question. It does get a little bit confusing for people. And the technology has obviously outpaced the FDD rules. And so, to kind of sort through these things and making sure that we're fitting it into the rules can get a little confusing. So the technology fee is really meant to cover the franchisor's cost for technology that it pays for and provides to the system. So these are not things that the franchisee are paying for directly, but if the franchisor is providing them, it's breaking down the cost per unit and passing that through to their franchisee. So a lot of times this will be things, even as it gets down to like website, email, if they have an overall contract, like some will have, let's say, a contract with their franchise management system and they pay that vendor directly. They will include that per unit into the technology fee then for the franchisees to pay. What it doesn't include is anything the franchisees pay for themselves. So a lot of franchisees will pay for their own POS system directly to the POS provider. They may be able to break some of these technology contracts out so that franchisees are subscribing directly and paying directly. Those things are disclosed in item 11, but they aren't part of the technology fee. And so what we work with our clients to do is, instead of trying to come at this and sort it out, from where does this all go and how, we just have them list out what's all the technology and what's all the costs. And then we kind of create from a spreadsheet there, then let's break out what are things the franchisor pays for, what is the franchisee paying for, and then make sure it's captured. So the thing about the technology fee is, in almost every FDD, it is subject to change because technology does obviously change from year to year, and these are such long-term agreements. So we have franchisors, if we look at, is it something that we can give an assurance that it's subject to change, but it won't go over a certain amount, so that they can give some comfort to the franchisees that it's not going to become this whole new profit center for the franchisor. So there is a little bit of a process to go through, and it is something that, again, it's easy to say when you come to renewal, oh, it's the same as last year, but since technology is changing so quickly, it's rare that there aren't updates to that piece of it.
Very good. Well, as someone that listens into this might be saying, okay, well, this is great. How can I get in touch with you all to learn a little bit about this, or maybe how you can help us? How can someone get in contact with you, reach out to you if they're in need of some help?
Yeah, they can go to our website. So it's www.entrepreneurlaw.com. So the entre, like entrepreneur, but partnerlaw.com. And on there, they can just send through a form and we will reach out and we can schedule no commitment, no cost consultation with them to see where they're at and see if we'd be a good fit to work together.
Perfect. And just curious, now I know most in franchising don't do this. Most are working through a franchise attorney or their franchise attorney like you all that they'd be working with on throughout this process. But what might you say to someone that's thinking as they listen to this or watch this, Ken and Meredith, this sounds interesting, but I think this might be something I can do myself, and kind of accelerate that process. I'm sure you've worked or spoken with folks along over the years that have said things like that. What might you say or suggest to someone that's thinking that?
I guess I would just point to the experiences we've had with people who have done that in the past. And then what often happens is they'll get a comment letter or a deficiency notice back from a state that something's not right. And it always costs more and it takes more time and it takes you away from selling your franchise offering and running your system if you're having to deal with those types of things. So, there's so many nuances. Some you can read an FDD and everything can seem kind of straightforward, but as we've talked about with how to handle different definitions and what needs to be updated every year, and what the state examiners are looking for. There are some nuances there. I think I think people are well served, to have someone who kind of gets to know their system. And, it doesn't have to be a super in-depth process. We can do these fairly efficiently. But yeah, it's a harder thing to clean up than to just have done done right from the get-go.
And I'll add to that, I'll say, as Ken mentioned, we have a pretty efficient process in doing these at this point and working through these pretty quickly. So we'll even get clients that will come to us and they'll say like, well, I'm just going to do my own red lines. And then, so we'll save on the fees. You just review them and check to make sure they're right. And even for that with us, like we're so kind of efficient in doing what we know to be doing and following our process that it usually doesn't end up saving time for the client, and it can actually kind of compound and make things more expensive in the end. So I'd say, to echo on Ken's point, to get somebody experienced involved early will just end up saving time and costs later on.
Very, very good. Well, and as we kind of wrap this up and bring this to a close, is there any kind of parting suggestion, recommendation, or parting thoughts you might have for someone who tunes in and for our audience here?
I think the only thing to add on that, we talked a lot about renewal and, the franchise. There is a piece, like Ken said, the document is living and breathing. And so if along the way, there are certain material changes that happen to the franchise system, they do require a potential amendment throughout the year. So sometimes people just get into this groove and they just say, all right, we'll talk to you next, January or February. But we just try to plant that seed that, if there's certain material things that happen in October, we still need to get in and update the document at that time. So it isn't just an auto reset and every renewal year comes. There are certain things that could require some of these disclosures to happen sooner.
Very good. Well, again, Meredith and Ken, what's the best way to connect for someone, again, that's interested in learning more? What's a first step that they can take?
Yeah, I would say, like Meredith said, go to entrepreneurlaw.com. You can click on either of our profiles and send us an email. We also have a form that people can fill out or give us a call and schedule a time. We'd be happy to talk with anyone about any of the things we've talked about today.
Great. Well, Ken and Meredith, I am so grateful for your time and thank you for sharing this information here for our audience to learn from. And for those that are listening or tuning in, if you said, wow, this was great for this live session here, we will have this uploaded to our podcast as well as to our YouTube channel so that you can review this and watch this again. And really, really grateful for your time here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.